everyone. Welcome to a very special episode of Unmasked with Barak. I have been waiting for this episode for a long time and so excited to have Barak on this podcast. He's just such an amazing human, like, apart from his degrees in Stanford, Harvard, over 25 years of experience as a seasoned finance executive, and just such a well-known professional in the finance field who scaled billion-dollar companies, has worked at Yahoo, Sunrun, Saildrone. It's just been so amazing to watch his journey and the way that he shows up for himself, the way that no matter what happens, he's always able to lift himself up, go into the unknown and push himself. And I've had the pleasure of working one-on-one with Barak since the last few months, and we've just had such amazing breakthroughs that I am absolutely honored to share his story and his experience on this podcast. So thank you, Barak, for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Wonderful. So let's get started, Barak. But before that, I invite you to take a breath with me. And, we always start the podcast by breathing into our heart and then opening our heart for an unmasked conversation. So let's breathe in. Welcome. So, Barak, would you please mind introducing yourself to the audience and sharing all the wonderful accomplishments that you've had in your life so far?
Sure. Um, Thank you for such a nice introduction. So my name is Barak. I am, as Simran said, a finance executive. I think what's important is I came to the United States as an immigrant when I was 10 years old. I am the oldest of three boys. I graduated from high school when I was 16. I graduated from college when I was 20. I had a degree in economics, went into consulting, worked globally around the world. It was in Boston and London and Paris and Manila and Los Angeles, and then left consulting, came into the corporate world, and have been at a range of private and public companies. I worked for the Oakland School District. I have an MBA and a master's in education, so worked for a school district that had gone bankrupt and got it back on its financial footing, and then have been in the corporate world in different capacities, ranging from senior director to vice president, and then have been CFO of the last several tech companies that you mentioned. I was always a high achiever, as you said, right from middle school when we came to the United States, and high school, and it was all straight A's and AP classes, and Harvard undergraduate and Stanford graduate school, not once but twice, and then working for some of the best venture capitalists or tech companies and things of that nature. On the personal life, I was very close to my parents, very close to my brothers, was married to a wonderful man, and we had a fairy tale engagement story, fairy tale wedding story. We have two stepchildren from his previous marriage, and then we have a child together who today is 13 years old, right? So that was really when I felt like I had everything together. All of that was happening. I was CFO of a really great tech company. And everything was just up on the rise.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. And I'm sure you work so hard to create that perfect life, and you were always pushing yourself. And I would love to hear more about what values or, what responsibilities drove you in those early years. And you said that you came in as an immigrant and you obviously had immigrant parents, and as a Harvard, Stanford trained executive, so as someone who had always was expected to get it together, what was kind of driving you and what were you seeking?
So I think that's exactly right. And I think you find this across just immigrant families in general, regardless of the culture, where the children take on this responsibility, or at least the eldest born take on this responsibility to try and help the parents, even at a very, very early age, to take care of their younger siblings, to keep everything together so that the parents would feel like the sacrifice that they had made in coming here to get us a better life, was worth it. It had everything to do with, working every weekend when I was in high school, at my parents' restaurant, and trying to get the good grades and be a leader at clubs, etc., go to a good college, make something really worthwhile and meaningful out of this journey and this transition. And I think that that carried over into the professional life as well, right? So really wanting to participate in companies that were going to have a big impact on the world. And in my role in that, which the CFO is, or the role of any executive is to sort of help lead a company. People want to see that the people who are leading them are collecting information and then making rational decisions based on that, right? You don't really want a bunch of executives running around like chickens with their heads cut off, right? And especially for a chief financial officer, I remember at one point I was having a bad day because
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to print something out of the printer, out of the wireless printer. This was at work a long time ago, multiple jobs ago. I was vice president of finance at the time, but it was a publicly traded company, and it was an important role, and I just couldn't print out of the stupid wireless printer. Don't ask me why. Wi-Fi was working, the printer was working. It was fine for everybody else. It wasn't fine for me. I had some big deadlines, some big meeting to go on. I don't remember what it was, but I tried 6 times. And it's such a stupid small thing, but it gets you out of your skin because it's not something that you expect. Kind of like if you're getting a flat tire on your way to work and you have an important meeting. It's a small thing, but in the moment it feels bigger. And I remember just allowing myself to get upset. And somebody was trying to help me, and I sort of snapped at her, not personally, but I just reacted shortly. She was upset for 2 days. Like, people thought that there was something really wrong with the company because the vice president of finance, who's never upset, was upset. I was upset about a printer. And I
Mm-hmm.
learned very quickly that people ascribe, the health of a company, if you will, to whether, to your personal reactions. And so
Mm-hmm.
both on the personal front, I learned to keep it together, but also from a professional's front, I learned to keep it together.
Yeah. Absolutely. So you had the perfect marriage and, wonderful children and parents, and things look pretty good for the most part, right? Professionally, personally, but then suddenly in a series of changes, life went south and then came the unraveling. So tell us a little bit about, if you may, whatever details you feel comfortable sharing, what was kind of going on with that unraveling and what shifted and changed in your perfect life.
Yeah, I mean, it was really a combination of a whole bunch of different things, right? One thing, I ended up with some health issues. I ended up with sciatica,
Mm,
which thankfully is treatable, and we have access. I feel very fortunate that I have access to great healthcare. But, it literally took over my life for 8 months, right? And so you're just used to functioning and you just could not function, right? So that was one thread that was happening. Then my youngest daughter started having some health issues, right, of her own. Then my husband, right, we were together for 17 and a half years, and we decided to separate after almost 2 decades together. Um, and that involved also moving and finding a different home. Then we had some unrelated issues that were going on. So, issues with my connection with my parents, issues with a connection with one of my brothers. And so you put all of, and on top of that, I had decided that I was going to be leaving my job. And so all these things that, create the structure for your life. When you think of a structure, you think of something that helps to hold you and to hold your daily life and your daily rituals and things of that nature. And it just really started to feel like things were becoming untethered, right? Relationships and structures that, I had had for years, be they around relying on your body, relying on your significant other, just having certain expectations of the way in which your child's life is going to go, your family,
Right.
all those changed sort of at the same time. Within literally all of this was within 12 months of itself.
Wow. I can't even imagine. And that just like you wake up one day and your life as you know it is disrupted. Like marriage relationship of 17 and a half years, relationship with parents, your own health, your daughter's health. That's just so
I forgot.
much.
Yeah, and my dog of 15 and a half years died in the middle of all this, right? I mean, it was just like you literally wake up every day and you're like, what's gonna happen now? Like, and this
Yeah.
and this and okay, add it on, pile it on, right?
My gosh. So what was going on in your head and your heart back then, Barak? Like what were some of the feelings, or how are you processing or not processing, given that you're always been in control, who's super analytical, data oriented, and how are you navigating all of these disruptions in life?
Yeah, I mean, in a very type A person, in a very type A personality fashion. So what I found myself doing was dealing with what needed to be done to execute through, to move through these different components. And I think probably a lot of your listeners, viewers, the people that you work with probably experience the same thing. Like the reason that society rewards us, we are successful in our jobs and in many other facets of our society. Certainly, as an executive, a crisis comes your way. You want to thank people for giving you that information. And then you want to be able to take that information and assess it dispassionately and just say what needs to be done. What are the knowns? What are the unknowns? What do I need to have happen now? And prioritize ABC and then start working on those things and get yourself to the other side and make contingency plans, things of that nature. And so I found that to definitely be the case in my own personal journey with all of these issues that were coming up. I was very successful at setting up, like finding great doctors for my daughter, finding really great doctors for my sciatica, being able to get the care we needed. When my husband and I decided that we were going to separate, I was very good about, finding a new house with the job transition. And you just glom on to each of the many to-do items that then come from each of these things. And the doing doesn't really leave much space for the feeling, right? And so what I found was that I was executing, but I was not processing.
Mm.
And so I, like a good analytical person, made note of that and said, okay, well then now I'm going to process, right? So like, how is that going to work? So I'd never had a therapist before. So I was like, okay, I'm going to get a therapist. And so like a good type A person, I went through this directory. I found 8 different people that I liked their profiles, a combination of men and women who were local and remote. And I interviewed 6 of them, and then I picked 3 of them, and I did 3 weeks worth of therapy with each of them, and then I picked the one, and I'm really, really happy with my choice. But like, and then have been seeing him every week, if you will, right? It's been a year and a half now over that. And he's great, and he keeps pushing me to like, hey, it's fine. You're telling me about what you're doing, or you're telling me about the situation, but you're not telling me your feelings about it, right?
Right.
And what I'm finding is that I'm not getting to the feelings, right? And he keeps telling me, he's like, I understand this, and you get to have feelings about it. And I'm like, I know, I just can't. I'm not feeling them. I have this
Well,
wall. You can call it a moat. You can call it. Those are all sorts of different ways that you could say. But I am. I'm acknowledging that, hey, there's supposed to be this, when you've been married for almost 2 decades and then that goes away, right? There's a
mhm,
grieving process that
yeah.
I would tell my friends, my employees, my families that this is what they need to go through. Well, I need to go through it. And I noticed that I wasn't. And my therapist was like, you don't need to go through the stages all at the same time, but let's try this, let's try that. And I found myself over intellectualizing the moment or the reactions, as I'm sure many type A.
All of us do. We
Yeah.
push down our feelings, we bottle it up, we get it together, we get it done, we keep moving forward until we reach a point and we're like, we have to address what's going on in the heart,
Well,
right?
or it's gonna come out, right? I mean, I've had situations in my life, probably 2 or 3 situations where emotions have just come bubbled out and have surprised me. And I didn't want that same thing to happen now. And
Mm-hmm.
so with the confluence of all these factors, I decided to go and try therapy. And as I said, the therapy is great and it's very helpful, and I still have this moat. So I decided to go and try something different. A cousin of mine goes, I live in California. Your listeners may or may not be familiar with this festival called Burning Man out in the desert. Yeah, it's known for all sorts of different things. But in
Especially
this,
when you wake up. That's what I
well,
did
in
too. You go to work.
well, so my cousin has this wonderful camp, and they build all these beautiful art. And so he had a ticket, but he wasn't going. And so
Mm-hmm.
he calls me up and says, hey, do you want my place, including like his dome tent, and which came with like air conditioning and a sink with water? And I was like, yes, I will go. And there's an infinite number of ways to sort of experience any event, much less Burning Man, which has so many different ways. I went with like a box of Kleenex
Mm-hmm.
and a whole bunch of photos from my marriage and a writing desk, like a lap desk, and a bunch of papers, lined paper, and pens and pencils. And I went to there's a building in the center of Burning Man, which is called the Temple, and this is where people go to leave behind all sorts of grief and tragedies and loss, and be it everywhere from the loss of a pet to the loss of a marriage to health issues. It's a very powerful place to be. And I went every day once it opened, and I sat there and I would look at a different picture every day, and I would just sort of write about that. And then it's the reason it's called Burning Man is that they burn everything, not just the man, but also the temple. And so it was very powerful. I took all of those letters and the box of Kleenex, and I wrapped them in this beautiful ribbon that a friend of mine who was one of the builders of the temple, they were gifted this. He gifted it to me, and I tied it all together, and it went up limbs. And so that was a very different experience than uh over intellectualizing a conversation and what your emotions should be. But out of all the days that I went and sat there, and was like 5 or 6 days, um only one of them was I really able to cry. Like really, there was just one day, and it was sort of a limited type of an experience, if you will. And then there was one other time when, like, I felt the emotion come up, but it really it wasn't what I had hoped out of the experience. And so then I tried something else, which was to go to a hot springs and really try and like just sit there in silence, and just journal, in a place that had, a lot of energy around it. And again, each of these different elements was helpful in some ways. I was trying to triangulate, but the problem still remained. Like I still was just not able to get past this wall, no matter what I did.
Yeah. And you're so brave at attacking the issue from different angles and going head on, and therapy and journaling and Burning Man and just recognizing and having that self awareness that you needed to release. Because so many of us, especially the type A, analytical, highly successful individuals, we just want to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. We want to keep holding it together, and we want to keep projecting that perfect life and the fact that we have it all together and nothing is going to shake us. We're just not the society, like you said, it rewards us for just pushing down
Yeah.
emotions.
I was feeling that all the time, meaning it wasn't like I was not telling people, I had taken my ring off and was telling people that I was separating, and everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. How are you doing?" And then I would tell them about all the things I was doing, and everyone's like, "Wow, you've got it so together." And so that reward that you're talking about, you know, it's real, meaning, your friends are like, "Wow, okay, I want to check in. How can I help?" And then they hear all the stuff that you're doing and they say, "Okay, well, I guess you've got it all together." And so, I have some really good, dear friends that really wanted to help me process. I had my college roommate actually flew from London all the way to San Francisco and came to spend time with me just to help me find a new apartment and just
Mm.
spend time with me and be there. And it was really meaningful. Friends really want to help. And when you tell them that you've got everything together, when you show them this facade that's like, yeah, I'm keeping it all together, I'm taking care of myself and I'm getting sleep and I'm going to therapy and I'm talking about it and, continuing to be functional, it really takes away their ability to help. They tell you, okay, well, I'm here, what can I do? They keep checking in, you keep talking about what's going on, but still, you're holding them at arm's length.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so it seems like you were trying all these different things and they were helpful in certain ways, but there was still something inside which was not completely cracking in terms of getting to that release and getting that cathartic experience that you were looking for. Was there a time when you thought that this is too frustrating, or, what kind of led you to continue to push and look for different modalities? Because you and I wouldn't have met had you not been open and seeking for something more.
I think it's that in my life, I'd had two different experiences when emotion just came bursting out in a very sort of surprising, uncontrolled, and in one out of the two situations, I would even say just counterproductive. Both of these outbursts, like emotional, they weren't an outburst. There were these emotional, like events, like floods, whatever you want to call them, eruptions that went on and on and on and on and on for like, I don't know, 15 minutes. If you had told me 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute before any of these came out that I would be experiencing those, I would have laughed at you and said,
Mhm.
"That's not real." But sure enough, those things happen. And so I know that even though I'm keeping this wall, even from myself, right, from like my intellectual, like we think of a wall as like this, but I really think maybe the wall is like here, between your brain and your heart, or in my case, the stomach, which is where I know that I feel emotions, right? I feel, a bunch of sensations. And so I um, really find uh, that because of those two events, I know that I keep these emotions. I know that I keep this emotion. I did not want this emotion around so many different parts of my life to come bursting out uncontrolled. I wanted to be able to access them and to at least try processing them, because I'm just afraid that it's going to be too much if it's not something that I'm able to try to address. And I know you can't control your emotions, but if it's not something that I can at least try to address proactively, then I'm scared, given that one of these events was not a positive one, I'm worried about what impact that could have later on in my life.
Right. And also, you're somebody who's always seeking for more. You're always looking for growth. You're a very growth oriented person. And I can see you as someone who's like always pushing yourself to grow, to release, to become better. So I can completely relate to that. And so tell us a little bit about what you thought when our common mutual dear friend Emily invited you to a breathwork session. What did you think? What was going on in your head? And, I had, like, complete honesty, I had not Googled you before our session because I was like, I'm just going to show up. Let's see what happens. I don't know if he's going to enjoy it. But I don't want to steal the thunder, but after I looked you up, I Googled you. I was like, oh my God, like he's so well known and he's so accomplished. And I can't believe that we did a session together. But walk us through sort of that thinking process of what were you thinking before trying out breath work? And then what happened during and after that kind of caught you by
Yeah.
surprise?
One of the things that I can control is taking care of myself. So I'm a swimmer, and I believe in a lot like physical exercise and good eating and all of that kind of stuff. And so part of that is I've been doing yoga. I've been doing yoga since 1996. It's now sort of the September 2025, right? So it's been literally almost 30 years that I've been doing yoga. And as such, I do a lot of breathing exercises, right? And when Emily was saying to me that we're going to do a breathwork session together, I was like, well, thank God I love Emily. She's not just a dear friend. She was the officiant who married us. My previous
Mhm.
marriage, she and I call ourselves a brother or sister by a different mother, right? And so I was like, well, if Emily wants to do this, I'm going to do it no matter what. But I thought this was going to be breathing exercises that had to do with nostril breathing. We do this in yoga all the time. I find them to be really centering. I do lion's breath. There's, ujjayi breath. There's different types of breathing that you do. I've been doing those over the past 30 years. And I thought we were going to be doing breathing exercises. And what I expected to get out of that was some clarity, some centering, some meditation. That really wasn't my highest priority that day. I mean, Emily's my is a very high priority. So I was like, okay, then I will make this a high priority. And so I remember we started the session, and obviously you're just so like wonderful to be on the Zoom with. So it was just interesting to hear about your background, right? In pharmaceuticals and in science, and the way that you introduced this, what I remember is saying that, that this is the breathing patterns that get I'm going to get this wrong, alpha waves, beta waves, some waves to get to the same place as monks who have been meditating for, 20, 25, 30 years. And that this breathing pattern also is the same pattern used by like psychedelics, but obviously without taking any psychedelics or having any of these potentially deleterious effects. And I literally was like, that can't, that if something seems too, I've been raised my whole life that if something seems too good to be true, then it is too good to be true. And therefore just don't believe it, right? I mean, I grew up in a country where you'd go to the market and you'd negotiate, and so the claims that people make versus the reality is not generally the same thing. And so I was skeptical of the results. I was not skeptical of the research you had done. That sounded very well funded, founded. I was not skeptical of you. I was skeptical of what results was I going to get. And
Mhm.
then literally we lay down, we have the Zoom on, and we just start this breathing exercise. And it was just a different type of breathing than what I'd done before. And actually, the fact that you demonstrated it for us made it a lot easier, right? I didn't even have to think anything. All I had to do was just breathe. And about 5 minutes into it, I found that from breathing from in my stomach, just this emotion it went from my breathing just like out my mouth, and I found myself like uncontrollably not crying but like sobbing for like 10, 15 minutes. And then when we finished afterwards and we were just doing coming back to normal breathing, etc., I really did have some really meaningful, powerful visualizations, right? That actually were connected to my yoga meditation exercises, which was, but
Mhm.
they like continued them in a way that I had never found in yoga. And I just really felt that this was a great first step in taking stuff that had been pent up, this pent up emotion, and just letting it out in a way that I hadn't been able to do, whether it was through my therapy sessions or at Burning Man or the journal and the hot springs. It really, it really surprised me. And I really wanted to lean into that because the stuff I had been trying to do to get to that point wasn't having those same results. And this, I thought, well, if it worked once, maybe it'll work again. So
Mhm.
that's how that first session went.
Yeah. And I was just so happy because, it usually takes people 3 or 4 sessions to allow themselves to surrender. But I just thought that you were so brave in just stepping into the uncertain and just playing full out and pushing yourself. And it's very fulfilling to me when I see that people are just able to release and let go, because we can't really talk our way out of pain. We have to release, we have to allow it to move through the body, the trauma, right? And just seeing that pain and grief melt away from your body was very fulfilling to me. And talk to me a little bit about what you were saying earlier, which was very interesting, that people make claims and they talk about the results and outcomes and you weren't sure. So what did you actually think about the outcome after class one? And how has that sustained, or how has that changed now that you've been practicing breath reset for the last few months?
So following the session, I was like, I texted my therapist. I was like, oh my God, I need to talk to you, right? And I texted Emily, and I was just so pleased to have had this surprise, right? To have stumbled into something that gave me access to my emotions. And it was uncontrolled in the way, in terms of the emotion just came out, and but it was controlled in that we chose when to schedule this, and I was, alone, right? I was really was not expecting that much of an emotional reaction, and I was looking forward to continuing that, and really was open to both doing things in a group session, doing things in a one-on-one session. Really felt like what would be best for me would be to continue just doing these one-on-one sessions. I feel grateful and fortunate that I was able to get your time one-on-one, because I know there's a very limited number of slots on that. But some of the sessions have been more powerful than others, and a lot of that has to do with what I'm going through at time. And I've used different sessions for different things. And actually I've found that to be really helpful with you, Simran, when we sort of set an intention for each session. Like, one might be thinking about this particular loss, another one might be thinking about this particular loss, another one. There was a session where we were putting away things that no longer serve me, right? Like things that
Mhm.
are just, and it literally felt like, making feng shui in your, for me, in my stomach, as opposed to in your home. But in the same way that, in your home, if you've got junk that you're not using, or junk that's just accumulating, that's really not serving you, and then being able to take that, move it away, put it somewhere else, put it outside or throw it away, and either make more room for, just make more space, that then the space becomes more enjoyable for me, for sure, but also make room for new things. And so, those sessions have been powerful, and the visualizations afterwards have been powerful in very different ways. Nothing has repeated itself, and I can't say that I have processed what all of those mean. I can't say that I've necessarily sort of reached the other side, but it's definitely feels like it's taking something that's stuck and just starting to move it a little bit at a time. And every time you try and move it, it sort of moves more and more. That gives me hope, because previously I felt like what I was trying wasn't working and I was going to be stuck. I think you had used an example before that says, were you frustrated? Did you think sort of, were you, and it was less about frustrated. I had just come to believe this is it. And that, like, I've
Mhm.
put on, since I was a child, I've put on these limitations on myself and what I was going to be able to do. And then that I was, these things were going to be behind this wall until they came out, if they came out, and I was going to have to live with that.
Yeah. And it's so powerful to allow ourselves to receive and allow ourselves to share and to make room, right? Because nobody's life goes perfectly. And even when we work so hard to reach the pinnacle, to reach the perfect life, and then things fall apart, like what do you do? Right? And so I am so honored to be part of your journey, and in that unraveling, sort of sifting through life and looking at what's not serving us and shedding, but then also making room for the fresh and new, right? Because always, you and I talk about this all the time, that there's there's a silver lining, and we got to keep walking the path. We got to keep growing. We got to, like you have been so impactful to everybody else professionally, personally, like also taking the time out for your well-being to reset and to share and to grow. And so it's been wonderful to see your aha moments, to see your breakthroughs, and also to see you just like pushing through and, figuring life out and not just pushing everything aside, but just like attacking it head on. And I was also very excited when I shared a little bit about the retreat, and I know I hadn't even formally launched it, and you were amongst the first people to raise their hand, and you're like, I'm coming to the retreat in Costa Rica, and this is definitely a must do for me. So share a little bit about, what made you reach that decision about wanting to come to the retreat.
It was just very like there wasn't even a thought or a hesitation about it. It was just like, oh, there's an opportunity for me to do more of this in an intentional way, right? So it's kind of like if you do yoga, at your yoga studio once a week or once every 2 weeks compared to going to a yoga retreat, right? Or it's like, my daughter being in band, even though she's got band every day at school for an hour, she goes away to band camp for a weekend and she comes back so much more like just doing things in a more concentrated way just allows you to be able to really be in it and not just do something as an extracurricular experience. So it's not like, okay, now I'm living my life. Oh, now I'm going to stop and take care of myself in this breathwork way. It's really putting the care of yourself into the front and center. And, there were not easy dates, right? My brother was going to fly over from Texas to watch my daughter. I was going to then fly over to Costa Rica. There's like the hotel reservation. It's not hugely expensive, but it's not the most inexpensive thing in the world, right? To go away. It takes resources to do, especially when you've left your job. But it just felt like everything was aligning to just say, this is what you are supposed to do. It As soon as I heard that there was a retreat, I felt eager. And I say eager in terms of like, oh, you've had a taste of something, and now you could really go do more of that. So the idea of doing this in person was really wonderful. Doing this in this particular land that has so much focus of energy, I that was interesting. Doing this surrounded by other people who were willing to sort of try this thing out also felt very encouraging, right? I like doing things in groups. And so all of it just felt like the universe is telling you to try something at some point, even though you're an executive who's like a super type A person who's used to being the person who makes these decisions. Sometimes you just got to listen and just go with it, right? And so that's really what that moment felt like to me. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think I remember saying to you, sign me up. Like you didn't
Yes.
even tell me you were going to retreat. We were scheduling something and you were like, oh, I can't do it this Friday because I'll be in Costa Rica. And I was like, oh, what are you doing in Costa Rica? Oh, I'm scouting the spot for the retreat. And I was like, I want to go. I think that's kind of how the conversation went.
Yes.
Um,
Yes, and I'm so excited to have you, Barak, just because, I know that you'll get so much out of those 6 days. It's like you don't get that kind of growth in years, right? And you said you do it in a land which is so sacred. That land belongs to the Baruka tribe, which was the last undefeated tribe in Costa Rica by the Spaniards. That land, it was blessed by their elders and shamans, and it was meant for healing. And we'll be doing such ancient rituals, which the warriors used to do. And I think I really believe in the power of land and ancestors. And there's one thing for me to hold workshops online or in person, but the kind of magic and breakthroughs that you experience when you bring like-minded people together at a powerful land, it's just like it's really transformational, and I can't even wait to see the profound changes that are going to come out. What are you sort of hoping to achieve, and what are some of your intentions for the 6 days, given that you've taken so much effort? It's right after Thanksgiving. It's 6 days. You're putting in all of the time and resources. What are you hoping to gain out of it?
I want to be able to move along the grieving process, right? I mean, for all these different things, right? There's a famous song, I think Alanis Morissette maybe, who says somebody said every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. And you've got to let the past be the past and let it end. And I've just sort of, as my therapist keeps telling me, I've just moved on without actually grieving the ending of that which has passed. And if any one of my friends did that, if my child did that, right? If like any of my family did that, I would tell them that is not healthy. You are keeping things inside of you that are going to come out. And so I would like to be able to somehow puncture this, I guess maybe I'd say this wall, or just allow things to move back and forth, right? And get a little bit more of this motion going just to really get through this grieving process. I'm not expecting to be done with that by the end of the 6 days, but I'd like to be able to move that momentum along enough that that wall breaks. And I really, it's part of it is around grieving about all these things that have changed in my life. But part of it is around just integrating that into the future, right? And just thinking there will be additional things that will happen to me over the next 50 years of my life, right? That are going to be impactful. And I want to be able to process those when they come up.
And you're starting a fresh new chapter
Yeah.
in your life on the right foot in a more intentional way where you've developed a much higher awareness and level of consciousness about yourself, about your life, and what better way to just go to a sacred land and shed and be very intentional about
Yeah.
the next.
I think about the fact that I put up some protective barriers when I came to this country at age 10, right? And, having a child who's now, older than that, you see how formative those years are, right? And so those things served me well back then, but they don't necessarily serve me well today. And so I'd like to be able to change those things that I took on when I was a child. And that's not an
Mhm.
easy thing to do when you've been successfully served by those things for 4 decades.
Absolutely. So, what would you say to other executives, other CFOs, type A people, high performers who are kind of carrying on their struggles in private, or, they tell themselves, I don't have the time, I can't take out 6 days, I don't want to leave after Thanksgiving, but they're privately struggling. Like, what would be your advice to them?
So I think everyone is different, and there might be different ways in which you can access and process whatever is going on for you. My story just shows, I think, a pretty typical way of which a type A person just says, okay, now I'm going to process emotion. Now I'm going to execute on it. And that's not the way that it works. And so what I would say to people is it's possible to be surprised by yourself and your emotions, both in a positive way and a negative way. Skepticism is good, but so is an open mind and an open heart. And you may have the same experience with breath work, or you may not. You may have better experience with something else I haven't tried, in which case, please tell me. But I would just say that this has been really the most successful tactic that I've found to be able to access this. And I would really encourage everybody to at least try out a session or two, and see what kind of results you get.
Beautiful. One that, I really sit with, which is as someone who's been such a successful CEO, you have become so very conscious and soulful and intentional and emotionally aware. And not a lot of people in your shoes, especially if you look at men, want to be emotionally aware or sensitive or want to do yoga or mindfulness or breath work. And I would love to hear from you if mindfulness became part of the leadership culture. How do you think that business, ROI, our economy would change? So, what is the place of mindfulness
I
within
mean,
business and leadership?
so I would say all the business schools, certainly for the last 2 decades, have been teaching organizational behavior, and they've been teaching whether it's called interpersonal dynamics in some way, shape, or form. And they also teach like design thinking and designing your life and all of these different components. At Stanford, the big course was called Touchy Feely, which is the interpersonal dynamics. I'm sure every business school, has their own. And all the research shows that the ability to show some vulnerability, to bring your entire self to work, and to be able to share yourself in an appropriate way with people at work, being an authentic whole self not only allows you to function better at work, but allows people to connect with you more. And that's actually the number one thing that is necessary in productivity. So today, a lot of companies are still doing either remote or hybrid type work. And that makes it even harder to be able to connect to people, right? If all you're doing is having Zoom meetings or video meetings of whatever ilk and sort of trying to get through a spreadsheet or a report or a dashboard or a sprint meeting or something along those lines, and being able to tell people about some of what's either what's going on in your life or what you're going through personally. Like, so when people say, how are you doing today, you don't just have to say, I'm doing fine, right? You could just
Mm-hmm.
say, actually, I'm experiencing this or that today. It just creates better connections between people and allows you to be able to, I think, manage more effectively, because people don't leave jobs, right? They leave managers. And
Mm-hmm.
really, in order to be able to retain people, inspire people, grow them, manage them, you really have to understand what drives and motivates them, and how they're feeling and reacting.
Beautiful. And being able to connect with people stems from how well we're able to connect with ourselves. And so how it has helped me is that it has allowed me to show up as a more whole, as a more authentic version of myself, who is sometimes more vulnerable than society allows themselves to be. But the more authentically I show up, I find that people also feel safe to be their whole self to me.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so, one final question, Barak. If you could whisper one truth or one piece of advice to the younger Barak who was sprinting through Silicon Valley, juggling, hustling, trying to keep it together, trying to stay in control, what would you say to that young Barak?
But tell him that he doesn't have to be perfect all the time, right? That it's okay to make mistakes, and it's okay to, not be the best X or the best Y or the most put together this or the most put together that. And that's not a small thing, right? Again, these are values or expectations that we've put upon ourselves. Certainly, my parents didn't and don't expect me to be this. My spouse didn't and doesn't. My children didn't expect me to be perfect. Well, kids do expect their parents to be everything, but you can meet and exceed expectations. But it's also everything in moderation, including moderation itself, right? And so it's the same thing with perfection. Everything in moderation, including perfection.
Beautiful. Well, it was such a pleasure having you on this podcast, Barak. Thank you so much for taking the time. And I am so excited to have you in Costa Rica later this year.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and I can't wait for Costa Rica. We'll have to do another podcast afterwards to see how it went.